Did Frank Randall plant a fake headstone of Jamie's grave for Claire to find? Let's talk about it. As always, I am a book reader, and this will have spoilers for the books and the TV show, as well as some Easter eggs, so if you are looking to avoid those, please do keep on scrolling. Now, this is in reference to this flashback scene here where Claire and Frank visit Culloden together. They walk over the grounds and they see the headstones of the Highland clans there. While, of course, this scene and the scenes in season 2 and 3 are very impactful for Claire's character specifically, there is a huge deviation from the books here because in the books, Claire actually finds Jamie's gravestone, and that is when she chooses to tell Brianna about her true father being Jamie Fraser. And that headstone was planted by Frank. Now let's break this down. In chapter 4 of Dragonfly and Amber, Roger is reading letters and correspondence that were shared between Frank and the Reverend Wakefield, something that we know likely happened because of how close the two of them were, but in this chapter we actually get excerpts from those letters and correspondence that Roger is reading through. In this journal entry that the Reverend wrote on June 18th, he references Frank Randall here and that he had told him about the discovery of Jonathan Wolverton Randall's grave at St. Kilda, and that he asked him if he wanted him to photograph the stone. At this point in the story, Roger has just met Bree and Claire, and he calls Brianna and asks if they want to go to this gravestone at St. Kilda and see it for themselves. And Bree is none the wiser and thinks that Claire will be excited about seeing the headstone of one of Frank's relatives, Jonathan Wolverton Randall, whom Frank revered so much, and agrees that they both will go with him the next day. Now, Claire has a different vision of how this afternoon together is going to go. She views this as a good opportunity to tell the two of them about her actual history and story with Jamie and everything that transpired when she went back through the stones. And she also remembers the place, St. Kilda, but at this point, Roger hasn't determined where the rest of the Lallybroch men are. She also recalls, and some of this got cut off, that she regrets her promise to Frank that she wouldn't write to the Reverend Wakefield because she thinks that if she were able to ask him for help on this, he probably would have been able to locate the Lallybroch men by this point. So this is yet another example of Frank controlling Claire in some respects. Now, when they do get to the graveyard and they find the headstone, Bree is very excited to share that with Claire and show her something that she wasn't expecting to see on their visit there that afternoon. But obviously, Claire has a very different opinion of Jonathan Wolverton Randall, and it spooks her deeply to see the headstone. One of my favorite call-outs in this text, though, is that she gloats, "I told you," because as we remember in the show, she predicted his death and told him that when they were in the dungeon cell scene at the prison. And so for her, this is validation that she was right when she told him that date. After that, they give Claire some space and Roger and Brianna go inside to the ruins and they share a kiss. And when they return to find her, Claire looks very spooked and they're looking at a stone that she spotted. And Roger had earlier pointed out that no one had been buried in that graveyard since the 18th century. It's been 200 years. But in the graveyard, Claire finds the gravestone of James Alexander Malcolm Mackenzie Fraser and is beside herself. The headstone that Frank had written says "Beloved Husband of Claire" on it, and this is how Claire chooses to tell Brianna about her true father, and they have the entire conversation in the aftermath of this realization. Now, this excerpt here is another example where Claire promised Frank that she wouldn't leave him and he wouldn't let her go. He was very much fixated on this, and so him creating a fake headstone in the books is quite believable at this point. One of my favorite Easter eggs for the upcoming Blood of My Blood series happens in this excerpt here, where she tells Bree if she doubts that she's telling the truth to go to the National Portrait Gallery where a painting of her grandmother, Ellen Mackenzie, is hanging, wearing the pearl necklace that Claire has on in this scene. And if she brings a hand mirror, she'll be able to look at the portrait and at herself and see an exact likeness. And we know that at the end of season 7, we got a little glimpse of that portrait of Ellen in the hallway at Lallybroch, and there was meant to be a connection to how much she looks like Brianna. I know a lot of people don't think that she looks like that in the painting, but this is straight from the text. So this is a little foreshadowing to the Blood of My Blood series, which I think is cool. So how do we know that Frank is the one who actually planted the stone? Well, that doesn't come until a later book excerpt, and we find out from Roger. In chapter 71 of Drums of Autumn, Roger approaches Jamie and has a conversation with him where he tells him he needs to tell him something, and had committed this letter to memory that he then repeats to Jamie. He tells Jamie that his father was a minister and that this letter was a form of a confession that had been sent to him by Frank Randall, and he had remembered it so that he would be able to repeat it one day. Originally, he believed that he would want to tell Brianna, and he does eventually tell her, but he now realizes that this letter is more significant to Jamie than anyone else at this moment in time. Now, I highly recommend you go to this chapter and read this in its entirety. I've included some snippets in here. But in this excerpt here, Frank says, "You'll recall a few years ago about the gravestone at St. Kilda's, the kind friend that you are. You never asked me what that was about, but I believe it's time I should tell you." Frank admits that he's unsure why Blackjack Randall would have been buried in this particular location, but his burial site is mentioned in the family papers, and if Bree ever becomes curious about her family history one day, she will go to this kirkyard. And that is why he asked that the Reverend Wakefield put up the other stone nearby. It will stand out amongst all the other ones because it is newer, and the rest will be crumbling due to their age. He knows that Claire will likely bring Bree back to Scotland one day and bring her to St. Kilda's, and we'll see it there. And he admits here, "I've made the gesture, I shall leave it to chance what happens when I am gone." Now, at the beginning of this letter, he had pointed out that he knows he has heart problems. This is also a deviation from the books. The show, he is in a car accident, and in the show, there's no mention that Frank knew that his death was imminent. He admits in this confession that he did go and look for a Jamie Fraser all throughout history, and whether Claire was telling the truth or not, he did find him. And then he explains that he had very negative feelings about this and wanted nothing more than to have his revenge. He also admits that if what Claire said was true and what happened was true, then he would have taken her away from Jamie Fraser, and for him that's some sort of revenge that he can live with. He also admits that even though he doesn't even know for sure that this James Fraser is the same one, he feels as though he knows him, if not for any other reason, then he sees it in his daughter's face every day, in Brianna. The feeling is so strong that he thinks that sometimes he can feel him looking over his shoulder across the room. In this excerpt here, he admits that he treated Claire badly, depending on how one might look at it, but we know as book readers that that is the case. And he admits here he is guilty of hate, jealousy, lying, stealing, unfaithfulness, the lot. In the aftermath of this conversation, Roger reflects that if Frank hadn't chosen to keep the secret, then he would have never placed the stone there, and he doesn't know if Claire would have learned the truth anyway about the stone. Maybe, maybe not, but at the very least, it had spun him and Bree on this journey to find Jamie back in time. Because he planted this little secret for them to find, it led Bree to meeting her father again. Now, I would argue that there are many courses of action that could have played out that would have caused Claire to tell her the truth and eventually have her come around to it and send her back through the stones. But in Roger's head and in book canon, this is the inciting incident. It's also important to note that one could argue that Roger wouldn't exist if this all didn't unravel the way it had. And he has that thought too. So there's definitely a lot of reflection going on here, as Outlander is so good at doing, with where is time starting and finishing, and what is the sequence of events that creates this time loop that they're all in. It's just something that makes your head spin thinking about it, but it's very interesting, especially as we have more and more characters that are now time travelers and falling into this category. So Frank planting a fake headstone is one of my favorite book moments. Sad it's not in the shows, but this is the lore if you were ever interested.